Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is our second day of the workshop that we are doing. And today we will be hosting a session with Dr. Mohammad Hazim Shah from Universiti Utara, Malaysia. He will be speaking to us on the topic of Islam and philosophy of science. Professor Mohammad Hazim Shah holds a bachelor degree in liberal studies in science from the University of Manchester, a master's degree in philosophy from London School of Economics, and a PhD in the history of philosophy and science from the University of Pittsburgh, USA. He is currently serving as the professor in School of Languages, Civilization and Philosophy, College of Arts and Sciences at the University Utara, Malaysia, where he teaches philosophy courses under the Bachelor of Philosophy, Law, and Business program. In the past, he was a professor of the History and Philosophy of Science at the Department of Science and Technology Studies, University of Malaya, Kuala Lumpur. He served as the Deputy Director of the International Institute of Public Policy and Management, University of Malaya. Professor Hazim has published widely in a number of local and international journals and book chapters and edited books. His area of expertise covered the history and philosophy of science, the relationship between science, religion, and culture, and comparative studies on science and philosophy in Islamic and modern civilizations. He has been appointed as a member of the Science and Islam Task Force, which was headed by the former Secretary General of the OIC. Please welcome Professor Dr. Mohammad Hazim Shah on the topic of Islam and philosophy of science.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the introduction. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I got this invitation only recently, yesterday, from Sharan, and I was told that they need someone to fill in this program and give a talk. Yeah, so since I'm familiar with this topic, I said, why not? Why not? Although I must apologize beforehand for not preparing a set of slides, but I was told by Sharan that he has already given the slides from my previous lectures, on this roughly the same topic. I think there were 7 or 8 lectures, maybe. So you can go through the slides in order to get more detailed information. So, okay, the topic of my talk today, Islam and the philosophy of science. And when we say philosophy of science, we mean contemporary Western philosophy of science, because in the world academic field, that is what is normally referred to when one speaks of philosophy of science. The philosophy of science as formulated by, for example, theological positivists, Karl Popper, Thomas Kuhn, Feyerabend, Lakatos, and more recently the postmodernists, social constructivists, and so on. And how does Islam or Islamic intellectual thought feature in this, or does it feature at all? Is there any entry point by which Muslim intellectuals can engage in the dialogue on the philosophy of science as carried out by Western academics? Now, historically, Muslim intellectuals, a few of them have already engaged in the dialogue. 2 prominent ones are Syed Hussein Nas, who is based in the United States, and another who's now based in Britain, but originated from Pakistan. That is Ziauddin Sada. And also another Pakistani scholar by the name of Parvez Hoodboy, I think, who's quite a controversial figure in your country, where he criticized, I think, the Islamization of knowledge program during the period of Ziaul Haq. So I'm quite familiar with the sort of discourse that is going on there and the sensitivities too, that affects scholars over there. So it's not the case as if Muslim intellectuals are totally out of the circuit. yeah, in terms of engaging in critical discourse on philosophy of science amongst intellectuals in the West. Yeah, although of course in the West, because of the professionalization of the field, plus there are societies, associations which devote itself exclusively to philosophy of science, and there are journals devoted to it. Yeah? So it's a profession to be a philosopher of science, and they engage in really detailed research on various subtopics and issues in the philosophy of science, and you can virtually make a career out of it. Yeah? But I'm not interested in that sort of academic specialization when I talk of philosophy of science. I'm more interested in its general impact on the intellectual world, and especially on the Muslim world. And obviously, when one thinks of these two domains, on the one hand, Islam and teachings associated with Islam, and contemporary philosophy of science, it looks as if there is no meeting point initially, at the first glance. Why? Because Islamic thought, like medieval Christian thought, has a medieval tinge to it. Although as Muslims, we do not see it as medievalism. But when we engage with Western scholars, they see it as medievalism. Because we would bring in categories like the spirit, for example, the reality of the afterlife, and so on, which in Western thought is passé, is no longer considered as part of contemporary Western intellectual discourse. So how do we fit in? I think instead of approaching it head on, bringing in our own epistemological and metaphysical baggage. I use baggage in a sort of neutral sense. It is better, I think, if we approach it from within the field itself, from inside, and then see how we can contribute to the debate, in order to sort of get into sort of a constructive engagement. The term constructive engagement sometimes, which was, I think, associated with apartheid at one time, but it was not accepted by some. But never mind, I'll use the term constructive engagement. I think it's better if we look at the issues that they are discussing, and then see how we can contribute to that. And I think to some extent, thinkers like Syed Hussein Nas and Zia Sada has done that. I mean, for example, take the example of your own countryman, Zia Sada. I'm not sure how he is viewed in your own country, whether positively or negatively or neutrally or what. But the way I think Zia Sada approached it is this. He looked at Western science, and he looked at the criticisms made against Western science by Western intellectuals themselves. For example, by his good friend Jerome Ravetz, who was quite critical of contemporary Western science. And I think he wrote a book on the social construction of scientific knowledge or something like that. And then critics like Paul Feyerabend, and also Thomas Kuhn to some extent, of contemporary Western science, which shows some of the weaknesses in the modernist view of science, which sees science as sort of epistemologically privileged, as objective and rational and getting closer to the truth and so on. So you can perhaps use that as a starting point, to look at it from within and see how the notions of science as projected by the rationalists, philosophers, such as Karl Popper and the positivists and so on, the logical positivists and so on. These notions of science have been undermined to some extent through the criticisms posed by Feyerabend, by by the social constructivists even, and by Jerome Revets. Although the ethical dimension of science is not really the primary concern of Western philosophers of science, because they are more concerned with epistemological issues. For example, like a question of the rationality of science, or of scientific realism, which also infringe into the area of metaphysics. But nevertheless, the ethical dimension of science is important with regards to, for example, science policy. Now the field of philosophy of science has somewhat been broadened, initially into history and philosophy of science. If you look at it historically, the evolutionary development of the discipline of history and philosophy of science, you can see that initially there were these exclusive domains of philosophy and science and history of science on the other hand, and then the sociology of science. And the thing has become broadened into what is known as science and technology studies, and which includes philosophy of science, of course. And now the boundary between history, philosophy, and sociology of science has become somewhat blurred. Although the purists insist on maintaining those intellectual divisions, but they have become blurred, and they have also become connected with science policy in a sense. So science policy is when thinking about science becomes formulated as policy matters, documented perhaps in some policy documents, and then implemented in terms of how to organize and practice science and technology using state funds, public funds, and so on. And when it comes to implementing those ideas broadly at the policy level, then of course issues concerning the ethics of science gain prominence. It's not so much the deep philosophical issues about rationality of science or scientific realism that becomes useful when it comes to formulating policies about science. But it's the ethical dimension of science. And I think Zia Sada was quite correct to insist on the ethical dimension of science. And as far as ethics is concerned, science is quite neutral because of its emphasis on objectivity and neutrality. It cannot take sides, so therefore it cannot come up with ethical prescriptions, because as the positivists have said, there is a distinction between facts and values. Values is in the realm of ethics. Facts is in the realm of science. So this emphasis on objectivity in science, both by scientists as well as by modernist philosophers of science, then becomes a handicap when it comes to scientific practice. Because when it comes to scientific practice, you have to choose, for example, what research can be carried out and what research cannot be carried out. In fact, there are ethics committees that decides on whether a certain research project can be conducted or not. If it infringes on certain ethical principles, if it violates certain ethical principles, like, for example, testing of drugs on human beings, with possible negative consequences, then the ethics committee would probably not allow it. Or a human project on human cloning, for example. Why has there been a moratorium on human research on human cloning? Because it's considered as ethically unacceptable. So there, ethics is an important consideration, both as an intellectual issue as well as a practical matter of policy. And I guess as practitioners, you are familiar with this, and it's a sort of meeting point when we talk about ethics of science. And so when it comes to science being put into practice, and the ethical system that forms the framework for such considerations, then obviously one brings into mind Islamic ethics. And Islam has a well-developed system of ethics. So one can even think of, in terms of Islamic terminology, a FIC for science and technology. People have thought about, FIC for technology. Yeah? There could also be a FIC for science, so FIC for science and technology. So, and the entry point perhaps could start from a critical analysis of current practices in science and of science, yeah, and how unethical practices can be questioned, yeah, and how Islamic values can be brought into play in this, yeah. Simple issues like, for example, why do we engage in scientific research? For what purpose? Yeah. Well, the traditional logic behind it is, from the point of view of pure research. Yeah, it is to find out the truth about the natural world at the very general level. And talk about it very, very general level. You want to increase the corpus of knowledge in science and so on. So this emphasis on truth and objectivity and increase of knowledge and so on, yeah, is actually an ethical statement. Yeah, it's actually an ethical statement. But when viewed from the Islamic perspective, how is it then? Yeah, of course, Islam does not deny the search for truth. Yeah? In fact, as Islam encourages Muslims to seek for knowledge, including the knowledge of God's creation, which is the natural world. Yeah? But when it comes to its consequences for human well-being, yeah, then obviously one has to think as to whether the kind of research that you do will benefit human society or not. Yeah. So here, perhaps there's a divergence between the way the issue is considered in developed countries as opposed to developing countries. Yeah. Because you might play this game of, publications and so on, and get your article published in a Q1 journal, in the ISI Q1 journal, top journals in the world. But who reads it? Only a few people, perhaps. Yeah. And how does it benefit your Islamic community? Yeah. So we have been caught in this trap of neocolonialism. You see, we think that we have become independent states, post-colonial states. Yeah? But we are still not really post-colonial in the sense of being truly independent from the hegemonic forces that controls, yeah, the mindset of scientists all over the world and dictate on how they should practice science. Yeah. So, for example, promotions are a way of distributing rewards and also punishment, yeah? And that is closely associated with the publication system. Yeah? And therefore, this playing the game of ranking and Q1 publication and so on, I think reflects a certain uncritical mind on the part of the Muslim world. Instead of thinking of what is it that they should be engaging in, yeah, to develop Islamic society based on Islamic value system. They are conforming to the hegemonic criteria set by the West, yeah, and playing the game by their own rules, by the rules set by the West, yeah, and therefore focusing their research and so on and so on. I think there's nothing wrong with that, yeah. But I suggest that if you want to play that game, it's better if you migrate to the West, yeah. Might as well migrate to America or to Britain or to Germany and really play the game and hopefully play it well, yeah. But if you are still within the boundaries of your own community, within your own society, yeah, then I think the most sensible thing for Muslim scientists to do would be to utilize science in such a way that it would benefit your community first. Yeah. And this, I think, would reflect true mental independence, yeah, from Western colonial rule. Yeah. But are we doing that? Yeah. We are still concerned that, if we just pay attention to local issues, then we might not get that article published in some top journal, and therefore the ranking of university might go down, and so on and so forth. Yeah? But you see, even the West recognize that this is a game which they play, yeah, for their own advantage. You see, I mean, for example, one reason why they do this, yeah, is to market themselves. Yeah, but we don't need to market our universities to foreign students. Yeah, why do they need to be in the top 100 so that people look up to them and go there and study or do research? Yeah, but to me, it's fine. Yeah, if your university doesn't market itself internationally, as long as it's doing well, yeah, in terms of the parameters which I think people recognize what a good university should be, which includes, of course, good teaching. Yeah, but sometimes what happens is that teaching also has been neglected because of this overemphasis on this kind of game that they're playing. Yeah? So I think to be more practical, yeah, the ethical dimension of science should also include, yeah, how we practice science today, yeah, especially in the Muslim world. Yeah? And I think that would be more brave, and that would be more realistic, instead of talking about some hairy-fairy issues and philosophy of science and so on. So that's one aspect of it, yeah? the practical policy aspect of it, and its relationship with ethics. And I think Islamic ethics can be usefully applied on this, yeah? Because we might think that some of the statements that some Muslim ulama say are quite outmoded and so on. Like, for example, how we should help the poor, how we should show concern for our fellow men, and so these are ethical principles. But when it comes to putting it in terms of scientific practice, do we actually bring it into play? Yeah. For example, you can do useful research, yeah, in terms of simple things like, for example, low-cost housing. Yeah, low-cost housing, which be of tremendous benefit to the poor. Yeah, the poor who cannot afford homes to buy houses, because now houses are set at a very high price. Yeah, and I'm sure that research in engineering and so on can now produce homes at a low price. Yeah? Or how to increase our food supply and so on. Yeah? So it's back to basics, basically. Yeah, it's back to basics. Yeah. And these are things that I mentioned in the Quran, yeah? Helping the miskin, the poor, yeah? And the orphans and so on. Yeah? So I think our scientific and technological effort, yeah, should be organized around humanitarian ends. Yeah, humanitarian ends, yeah, which would please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yeah, it is the pleasure of God that we should seek, not the pleasure of human beings. Yeah, but what use is it? Yeah, if you get your article published in a Q1 journal, yeah? And that has no bearing on the hereafter. Yeah, I might sound old-fashioned, yeah? But if you read the Quran, the emphasis is on the hereafter. Yeah, so I mean, imagine you have accumulated all these distinctions, yeah? Q1 journals, and get fantastic promotions and so on. And then towards the end of your career, you realize that you have done very little to gain the pleasure of God. Yeah. And as the Quran says, you get your portion in this world, but what about the hereafter? Yeah. Now, it's not as if that paying attention to the hereafter will make you lose this world. I don't think so. I think if you do research would benefit humanity, people would remember you even after you're dead. Yeah. So people like, for example, Albert Schweitzer, the medical scientist or medical practitioner who helped people through his efforts as a medical doctor. Now, people still remember Albert Schweitzer until today. Yeah, but who would remember someone who has a high, H index and so on? Yeah, if his contributions there's no bearing on human society. Yeah. So I think things like this, should be of concern to us. Yeah. I mean, now we are facing this COVID crisis. Yeah. Have Muslim scientists done anything to do research on COVID-19 and come up with vaccines and so on? We are still dependent on AstraZeneca. We're still dependent on Pfizer. We're still dependent on Sinovac. Yeah. So I think when it comes to the crunch, as Muslims, we should be confident of our own cultural traditions and our own system of values, and how to implement this in today's world. And inshallah, I think we can, as the Quran says, Surah Al-Baqarah, if I'm not mistaken, verse 201. Rabbana atina fi dunya hasana wa fil akhirati hasana. Yeah. So we should strive to achieve happiness in both dunya as well as akhirah. Yeah. But contemporary science has forgotten this other dimension of life, which is the akhirah. Yeah. And this pervades both the ethics as well as the metaphysics and the epistemology of science. Yeah, as far as metaphysics is concerned, the issue that is discussed amongst Western philosophers of science is the issue of scientific realism, and this is hotly debated. I'm not sure whether anyone has read on the topic of scientific realism. And Western philosophers are basically divided between being realist and between being non-realist. The realists regard science as giving us the truth about the world, and when they say truth, it's not pragmatic truth only. Pragmatic truth meaning to say that your theory works, but it's ontological truth, and there's a big debate amongst philosophy of science whether scientific realism or non-realism is to be accepted as one's philosophy of science. And I have been engaged in this debate as well, because I think because of its importance on Islamic thought, its consequence on Islamic thought. And I think it's not a simple matter to decide, because the very notion of truth itself has to be re-examined. Because on the one hand, I wouldn't want to say that science is not about truth. Then it would seem that we are discouraging people from pursuing science, because if it's not pursuit of truth, then what are we pursuing? Are we pursuing a mirage or what? Yeah. But then the question of truth has to be subtly reviewed, because scientific realism has implications on scientific materialism too. And this is the dangerous connection to me. Because some scientific realists then go on to make the inference that only the material dimension is real. They say that, well, current scientific theories about the structure of the atom and so on, these are to be interpreted realistically, meaning to say that what the theory describes is what nature is like. And then they go on to say that if something cannot be explained in terms of atoms and molecules and their motions, then it cannot be accepted as real. And I think it is this kind of inference that is wrong. This is where realism has become wrong, because then you're saying that because scientific research has verified, let's say, the atomic theory through experiments and so on. Therefore, anything which is said to not have a material dimension to it and yet real cannot be accepted as true. Yeah, what does it mean? Well, it means that our belief in angels has to be thrown out of the thrown overboard. Yeah, because angels, yeah, are a reality which we as Muslims accept. Yeah, and that has been mentioned in the Quran also. In fact, if you don't believe in angels, then you can't accept the Quran, because Quran was transmitted to the Prophet Muhammad via the angel Jibreel. Yeah, so it's very fundamental to Muslim belief, to believe in the reality of the non-material dimension. Yeah, but scientific materialists, yeah, who are also realists, not all realists are scientific materialists, of course, they say that, well, reality can only be established through science. If it cannot be established through science, then it cannot be accepted as real. Now, this is the inference which I think is mistaken. It's like saying that since I live in Kuala Lumpur, therefore only Kuala Lumpur exists. London, New York, and Paris does not exist, yeah? Because it is outside the field of my vision or the field of my knowledge directly. Yeah. So I think this thing on scientific materialism is something which Muslims should be critical of. Yeah. In fact, of course, scientific realism being a philosophical view has been criticized also, because one of the weaknesses of scientific realism is that is due to the fact that scientific theories do change. Yeah. So, for example, changed with the Newton. Are you going to say that the ontology of the atom has changed? I don't think scientists would want to say that. I don't think scientists want to say that the nature of the atom has changed with the discovery of a new theory. No, it's our conceptual apparatus, conceptualization of the phenomena that has changed. But the atom, whatever it is, has not changed. Similarly with our theories of light, there's a progression of theories of light, yeah, from the early model that we associated with Thomas Young, and even Newton's corpuscular theory of light. And then you have a change to the wave theory of light by the French scientist Fresnel, and also the British scientist Maxwell. We have the electromagnetic theory of light. And then you have the photonic theory of light by Einstein. Yeah? So light is now conceived of either as a particle or as a wave. Yeah? And to cap it all, you have the duality of light in terms of the wave particle duality of light in quantum theory. So what is light? Is it wave, particle? And then scientists, eventually they can't make up their mind. They say it's both wave and particle. So if you are a scientific realist, you will be faced with this problem of trying to say for sure your identity. Yeah. So I think even if you look at it from within science and from within the philosophy of science, you'll find that it's not a simple method to say that, well, a scientific theory describes the truth about the world. Yeah. Because its ontological truth could not have changed. I mean, the ontological nature of light or atom could not have changed over the years. Yeah, it remains the same, but it's our conceptualization of it. So it shows that human conceptualizations are subjected to change. So I think it is not fair to sort of say for sure at any point of scientific development that we have finally discovered the true nature of the physical world. The best that we can say is our current theories say such and such. Yeah, that's why even a philosopher of science like Karl Popper is known to be a rationalist and so on, say that science is fallible knowledge. Science is fallible knowledge, and he has this concept of falsificationism and so on. Yeah? But it does not lend us into skepticism. For a Muslim, I think it does not lend us into skepticism and say that therefore we cannot have knowledge at all about this natural world. We can, but like Popper, we take the precautionary view that our knowledge is tentative. Yeah, our knowledge is tentative. Yeah, so that it doesn't prevent us from doing research. Yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't prevent. It prevents us from making this rather rash commitment to a particular ontology as being a final ontology. Yeah? So we say that only God knows. Yeah, wallahu alam. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with such humility in science. Yeah, in fact, it is good because you keep an open mind. Yeah, and you are open to new evidence that might modify the theory and lead to a better theory. So that's the more philosophical dimension related to science, and I think Muslims can also engage with those sort of discourse without fearing that their metaphysical baggage might necessarily handicap them in this matter. No, I don't think so. Yeah. And as the great Muslim Sufi Jalaluddin Rumi said, he said something to the effect that God's treasury is enormous. Yeah, we only have access to a part of it. Yeah, and yet we think of ourselves as being great. Yeah, so human beings are, as the Quran describes us, are essentially ungrateful people. Yeah, human beings are naturally ungrateful. So to me, I think COVID-19 is a blessing because it then reminds us of our own weakness. Yeah, despite advances in science and technology, we are still struggling to cope with this supposedly, scientifically low-level research concerning, COVID-19 virus, pandemic, and so on. Yeah, we have highly developed theoretical physicists and so on, but when we are hit by COVID-19, we are at the mercy of nature again. Yeah, so if you read the Quran, yeah, what it says about what has happened to past civilizations, what has happened to Kaum Ad, Kaum Thamud, yeah, and Pharaoh in Egypt. Yeah, the same thing could happen to us. We are under the illusion that we have progressed to the modern stage, and therefore, as Bacon would have it, that we would conquer nature. Yeah, but this attempt to conquer nature has been going on for what, 3 centuries? Yeah, since the 17th century, since the ideal set by Bacon. We have not succeeded even in handling cases like HIV, AIDS, and COVID-19. Yeah, what more with some more serious natural disasters? Who knows? Yeah, like for example, the tsunami, which once hit this part of the world really badly. And if you look at what happened to Japan, despite being an advanced country, when there was a tsunami that hits its nuclear plants, yeah, Japan was also at the mercy of natural forces. Yeah, so I think there has to be a sort of humility also among scientists. Yeah? That their knowledge, however great they might think, and all these delusions and illusions about Nobel Prize and so on. Yeah, apex in human achievement and knowledge and so on is nothing. Yeah. Compared to what could really hit us. Yeah, and I think we need to be constantly reminded of our own fragility, even as scientists, of our own fragility in the face of what could possibly happen. Yeah, but of course, this does not mean that we should discard our current civilizational ideals in terms of development of knowledge, in terms of development of human society, and so on. But I think the traditional vision, as set down by our Prophet Muhammad, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. That remains eternal to me. I think the message there is eternal. Yeah? It only has to be revived and synchronized with the current times. Yeah. So I think with this sermon today, although today is what day is it? Sunday. Yeah? It's very blasphemous to give a Sunday sermon for Muslims. But never mind. I hope my talk has, been of some benefit, inshallah. I hope, because I didn't really prepare for this, but since you all want me to say something, I feel obliged to do so to my Muslim brothers. Yeah. Okay then. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
We have some questions from the audience. First question from Mahim Rihan. Thank you, Dr. Hazim, for such a thought-provoking lecture. Do we have to work on the thought process of young generation? If yes, then how? Because we are trained to accept what West is always right, but we have very small ground to for practices and explore Islamic teachings in current situations.
Yes. Yes, obviously, we have a duty to the younger generation. Yeah? Simply because we have had more experience than them, we have gone through some things that they have not gone through. Yeah, and we have probably gone through the mistakes which they have not made yet. Yeah, well, of course, people always make mistakes, no matter how you remind them. Yeah? But I think we are fortunate still because as Muslim countries, yeah, we are still partly in charge of our destiny. Yeah, but as I've said, the top leadership especially has to play an important role in not formulating policies, yeah, that have been propagated by the West and that is not necessarily good for our own societies. Yeah. We are always fearful that, that we might be lagging behind. I think part of the reason is because of colonialism. Yeah? Because we've been colonized before, and we think that this colonial, our former colonial masters, yeah, they can recolonize us because of their superiority, and therefore we have to follow what they're doing now in order to prevent recolonization. But I don't think that is necessarily the case anymore. Yeah, I think the West has also going through a period of crisis now, yeah? Economically, medically, and so on, and they are not necessarily at advantage compared to us. Yeah, so I think we have to be brave enough. Yeah, we have to be brave enough to really be independent in its true sense. Yeah, and teach the young what we have realized is good for Muslims, yeah, and for our own community, yeah. So, for example, if we want to teach them about values to be adopted in the pursuit of knowledge, yeah, then we can teach them what Islam has taught them, and I don't think this would make us backward. Yeah, for example, simple things like intellectual honesty. Yeah, simple things like the realization that this world is governed by a higher power, by a divinity, and the fact that the world is regulated by the laws of nature does not mean to say that nature is self-functioning, that there is God out there that's in command of all these laws of nature, that it is his laws rather than nature itself being autonomous in making those laws function. Yeah. So in other words, we have to come up with our own Islamic philosophy of science. Yeah. And I think to some extent, I think Iran is quite brave in this. Yeah. And yet Iran, in terms of being a scientific power among the Muslim countries, I think it's probably second to Turkey now. Yeah. So, so I don't think, an insistence on Islamic values would necessarily make us backward. Yeah. as how I think Parvez Woodboy would have it. Yeah? I think Parvez Woodboy has read his history wrongly. Yeah? He has chosen on certain aspects of Islamic history to make his case. Yeah? So it's a case of cherry picking. Yeah? But I think if you really look at Islamic teachings and put it in its contemporary context, yeah, I don't see how our younger generation can fail, yeah, to develop a better society, yeah, which could perhaps also contribute to world civilization, yeah? Because the world now is looking for remedies, yeah, to its current crisis, yeah, and I think we as Muslims, yeah, we have a duty to show them, yeah, that the Islamic way is a viable alternative, yeah, and we should start that confidence with ourselves. If we cannot prove to the world that we can make things work, then how are we to convince them to accept us? Yeah. So I think there has to be a courage on our part, yeah, and a strong belief in ourselves as Muslims, yeah, and the teachings that we have been taught as Muslims, yeah, that it can work, and inshallah, yeah, inshallah, I think it can work. Yeah? And I think you all are more well versed on what these Islamic teachings are than myself. Yeah? But I think that the fault is partly with the current leadership that fails to take this brave move, yeah, because of international competition, because they feel that they might lose out in this international competition. But I think if they make a concerted effort, yeah, and with the help of their own local intellectuals and so on, they can chart a new course, which could even be a model to be followed by the rest of the world. Right? Okay.
I think there is a related question from Aisha Sayed. Academia has become a number game. What should be the course of action for researchers who wish to dedicate themselves to a sincere pursuit of knowledge for the sake of betterment of humanity?
Yes. Okay. Now, I don't want to give sort of utopian solutions that would be impractical or unimplementable in your case. Yeah, I try to be realistic as well. Yeah? Now, okay, sort of a realistic, practical solution that I can suggest is this. Yeah. Now, I'm sure that there are some journals in your country that have already achieved Scopus status or ISI status. Okay. So perhaps I'm suggesting a compromise, you know? Because not everything about Scopus or ISI is bad. Yeah? So using that as a starting point, you can make these journals, these local journals that have achieved those accreditations, yeah, to develop along Islamic lines, yeah, and to make it clear in their general policy that they are interested in this type of articles, yeah, which promotes Islamic values, yeah, directly or indirectly. I mean, not in a crude way, yeah. But let's say you have identified certain areas of research would be of benefit to your community, yeah. For example, I think in the Middle East, it's problem of desalination, yeah, how to get water from sea water, salty sea water. So desalination can become a focus area for your projects, because it might help your community in the Middle East. Or if it's in Pakistan, I'm not sure what would be your priority there in Pakistan. Yeah? Maybe agricultural research, or how to increase productivity of agricultural land and so on, which can then bear fruit on your own people, yeah? and help the Muslim Ummah. Yeah? Or how to develop architecture that could be at a low cost. Yeah, houses, develop houses for poor people, yeah, at a low cost. Yeah, and these contributions can be published and patented. Yeah. So it's just a matter of realigning those values. Yeah. and coming up with results which are not only publishable, but also which eventually can be useful instead of, all these publications which very few people read is just left on the dusty shelves, left to dust on the shelf of some erudite the library. We can focus our research more on issues and challenges which we are now facing, yeah? And which will benefit us. Yeah? So you can still get your promotion because you get your article published in Scopus and so on. Yeah, but at the same time, you know that it's not going to be wasted. Your effort is not going to be wasted, both in this world and the next. Okay.
Asma Zahoor, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Assalamu alaikum. I am Dr. Asma Zahoor from Rawalpindi Women University, and basically my research area is English literature. But previously I have read a novel by an Urdu writer, Abe Hayat, in which the writer has beautifully, thrown light on the Islamic financial system and capitalism. If I would like to do research on it, I think it would be another dimension to introduce our students to the Islamic value system. I mean, it may not fall in the exact domain of Islamic research, but don't you think it would be another way to persuade people to come to religion and see how we can compare things and how things can get better in the long run?
Yes, I think that is a viable option in terms of research in that particular area, because capitalism is so widespread now, its tentacles are everywhere, and we all know that the foundation of the system is riba, yeah, and as Muslims, yeah, we have to draw the line there, yeah, and so it's useful, of course, yeah, to see how capitalism affects us as Muslims, and how we can actively confront this situation or engage with it in a way which would free us of riba. Yeah, because we don't want to live in sin. Yeah, and if it concerns our livelihood especially. Yeah, because what we consume, yeah, should be halal, yeah? Including the economic process that brings about the consumption that enters our body eventually. Yeah? So I think, yes, at the level of thought, at least, if it helps to clear our minds on what capitalism implies for us as Muslims and what we should avoid through that system, then I think it can be of benefit. Yes.
Okay, while we'll wait for more questions, I have actually another question from myself, which is about these scientific theories.
Yes.
Prof, it's a bit difficult question for me. There is on one hand, there is God's decree, and then there is another end where we have natural processes. For example, we all believe that everything was created by God. But we also know that today everything is born by a natural process, like plants, animals, humans. We all are born through a natural process. So we also know that when God made this earth for man, this earth was not in the state as we see today. It has gone through several stages to become habitable. So what I see from Islamic religious scholars is that there is one group who always rejects scientific theories or tends to reject theories, and the other group, they try to prove scientific theories from Quran. For example, one group says, evolution, it cannot be, possible. It's not how God did it. But what if, as human knowledge is progressing, what if this evolution becomes an established fact? What if this was the natural process through which God actually made man, on this earth. Similarly, the other group, they, for example, these days there is a talk of multiverse and infinitely many universes. So they try to prove these multiverses that from Quran that science is talking about today, but 1400 years ago, Quran was able to prove that there are multiverses. So, what is your view on these things?
Yes, okay. Interesting question to which I don't think I have a good answer, but unless I will try to give an answer. Yeah? Well, yes, I think I know what you're alluding to. I think it's the term used is Bukelism. Maurice Bukel has come up with a book on Quran and science or something, and showed how verses in the Quran showed that the scientific facts are already there before Western scientists discovered it, and so on and so forth. And I think Syed Hussein Nas was quite correct in commenting on this, say that the Quran is not a book of science, it's not to be read that way. But of course, I do not deny the fact that there are some verses in the Quran that can be interpreted through the benefit of our current scientific knowledge. Like, for example, I think the ayat in Surah Fusilat and Surah Anbiya, about how the earth and the sky was previously united and we split them apart. I think that's very interesting, because if you look at history, astronomy from historical point of view, how this universe evolved. Earth was a later evolution; it was a later creation. Previously, it was like dust particles and then sort of coagulate and form the Earth. Just like how dust they exist as particles and then they clump together and then you get a solid mass. So I think that makes sense. Surah Anbiya and Surah Fusilat. I'm not sure which was. I think Surah Anbiya 30 or something. How the Earth and the sky was united and we split it apart. I think that passage really strikes me when I read it. And also about the nutfa, the semen, and how it's combined with the female ovary and so on, and form an embryo, the zygote, and so on. Surah, what was this? Ikrak bismi rabbikal ladzi khalaq, khalaqal insana min alaq. That also refers to biological phenomena. So I don't think that we should sort of totally separate them apart, saying that no, we cannot make any connection at all. I think there are some cases where you can make connections. But of course, there are controversial areas where we cannot know for sure, whether what science is what is also found in the Quran. And I think for me, the safe approach to take there is if it's not confirmed yet, then we might better not speculate on it. Because there is a verse in Surah Ali Imran, I think, verse 7, which says about mutashabihat. Because in the Quran, there are two types of verses, muhakama and mutashabihat. Mutashabihat are allegorical, which can be given different interpretations. So you can go either way there. You can give an interpretation based on your own preferences, which might be wrong, or you might be an enlightened person who might be able to give a correct interpretation of the mutashabihat verses. For example, to take a simple example, God says that everything in the world worships me, but some worship me in forms that you do not know. So how are we going to interpret that? I mean, normally we associate worshiping with human beings, carrying out prayers and so on, prostrating and so on. But if you look at I think there's one word which says that even the stars and the moon, or the stars and the moon, they prostrate before God, sujud. How are you going to interpret that? It's I think allegorical, so it's mutashabihat. Yeah? And perhaps we can throw light on this, yeah, through science, yeah, and obviously, I don't think that the door of ijtihad is completely closed, yeah? Even when it comes to theory of evolution, frankly speaking. Yeah? I think I sympathize with you there because even during my teens, at least my teens, I had this problem of imagining how Adam and Eve came down to earth from the sky. I mean, it just dropped without parachute from the sky. So even until today, I'm still struggling with that issue. Yeah? So I sympathize with that. I mean, we are inclined as thinking beings and normal thinkers and rationalists and philosophers and scientists to try and make sense of it. Yeah. Although on one hand, we do not want to reject the Quranic verses. I mean, that's not an option to me. Yeah? But I mean, our intellectual honesty would make us be inquisitive along those lines. So we just have to ask for God for enlightenment. But I was quite surprised to find this thing which I read from Ibn Arabi. Yeah? Have you all heard of Ibn Arabi? The great Muslim mystic, Andalusian mystic, I think somewhere 12th century. He had this book called the Futuhat al-Makkiyah. Have you heard of the Futuhat al-Makkiyah? And I think it's probably there or somewhere else that he said that he relates this experience which he had. He was doing the tawaf around the Kaaba. Yeah? I think the English word is circumambulating, or something. It's a difficult word. Tawaf. Yeah? And he met someone who identified himself as Adam. Yeah. But then when Ibn Arabi talked to him, he said that, but I am not the first Adam. Yeah. So that was very interesting to me. Yeah? He was not the first Adam. So is Adam a generic term or is it a specific name? Yeah. But again, as I've said, this is mutashabihat and I don't want to get into murky waters, but I think it's food for thought. I think it's food for thought. But I don't think that in the history of Islamic thought that there weren't any Muslims who considered accepting the theory of evolution in some version of it. I think in Pakistan it was Iqbal who sort of accepted that, and he was criticized by other more conservative thinkers, including Syed Hussein Nasr. Okay.
Okay, Jazakumullah khair. Thank you very much. I think your what I can summarize from your answer is that when some scientific theory is not confirmed, it is not an established fact, we should not comment upon it. So with this comment, our time today has ended. Could I request you to please summarize today's session in a couple of minutes, and then I'll hand over to our organizers.
Okay, you want me to give a summary?
Yes.
Okay. Briefly, what I said earlier was that philosophy of science basically has its origins in the West. Yeah, at least when you talk about philosophy of science, the level of international academia, yeah, with its own publications, journals, and societies, and universities running courses on it, and so on. But as Muslims, as Muslim intellectuals, yeah, there is nothing to prevent us in engaging in a constructive dialogue with Western philosophers of science, especially since philosophy of science is an important field in shaping our cultural image of science, yeah, which become translated into some sort of science policy issues and so on, some policy documents and so on. So that's my first premise, that as Muslim intellectuals, we should not shun ourselves, yeah, or avoid from engaging in the discourse that is currently going on in the West on the nature of science, scientific knowledge, and on science policy and so on, because we cannot deny the fact that as states that are attempting to modernize, we need modern science and technology. But then as Muslims who want to retain their own identity and their own religion and so on, we cannot simply accept modern science without looking at it from an Islamic perspective. Yeah. So the Islamic perspective has to be retained. Yeah. And science has to be viewed at from within the Islamic perspective. Yeah. But there shouldn't be any fear that this Islamic perspective is necessarily medieval, outmoded, or outdated, and could possibly be the source of our being recolonized, as Professor Boy would have it. Yeah. I think bringing back the Islamic perspective in a more enlightened manner, in a more confident manner also, yeah, can help to overcome even some of the weaknesses that has been identified by even Western scholars themselves. Western scholars themselves have been quite critical of the scientific enterprise. Yeah? And I mentioned one of your own thinkers, Ziauddin Sadar, who sort of incorporated some of the criticisms against Western science and so on, and then provided his own Islamic alternative. Yeah. You might not agree with him, whether you agree or not, that's a different matter, but at least he made that effort. Yeah. And I think as Muslim intellectuals, we should make a similar effort. And the consequence is that it should eventually filter down into our own society and benefit us in terms of our own social and cultural practices and even educational practices. Yeah? So I think these three things, yeah? Iman, ilm, and amal. Yeah? Iman, faith, and then knowledge, ilm, and then our amal, our actions. Yeah? If we have all these three, then we have a complete chain there. And inshallah, yeah, the Islamic package there will work out. And then I spoke on metaphysical issues concerning scientific realism and so on, yeah? And how it affects us as Muslims, yeah? What sort of attitude we should take. Yeah? And there I mentioned the possibility that engagement with scientific realism might lead to some sort of scientific materialism, which denies the reality of the spiritual and of the ghaib, the unseen. Yeah? And I think that is not an option for Muslims to take. Yeah? And I mentioned some of the criticisms made against scientific realism itself. Yeah? So the ontological nature of the physical world is still an open issue. Yeah? Even among scientists, they recognize that, I think. Yeah? That the fact that our contemporary theories in science is not final, it's not ultimate. Yeah? So again, I don't see how adopting an Islamic perspective wouldn't necessarily, put us back into the Middle Ages and not be in a strong position to compete internationally. I think it's only because of our deep colonized mentality that we are fearful of taking this brave step. Yeah, and inshallah, I think if we re-examine our own premises, yeah, and see how Islam could truly contribute to this new effort there, then inshallah there could be a tajdid, a renewal of sorts. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very much. It was a great pleasure to have you today with us. And I thank everybody who participated, who asked questions. And I would now hand over to you, to Ehsan Malik, who is the organizer of this session today. Ehsan, please.
Thank you, Brother Sajjad. Thank you very much, Professor Hazim Shah from Malaysia. Thank you very much. You agreed for this lecture on a very short notice. So I'm sorry that we apologize for not giving you enough time. But inshallah, in the future, we will have more interaction and we will try to arrange more sessions. This is a vast topic and cannot be covered in 1 hour. Brother Shahran, thank you very much for being with us today and also for introducing Dr. Hazim to us. Brother Shahran has shared a link of some of previous lectures of Professor Hazim. Inshallah, we will be sharing with our participants. Today, we have 3 more sessions. After this session, we have an offline session. Brother Shahran is moving very fast and they are 3 hours ahead of us. So we have missed some lectures today. We will have a session of issues and challenges in Islamization of knowledge. I will share the link in WhatsApp group, so you will follow it. We will join the Zoom link from Malaysia at 1 p.m. So that will be a live session. Brother Shahran has left, I think. It was better if he could introduce the resource person who is from Gambia, I think. So it's very important, and he's very important personality of his country. I think he's advisor to the president. So he will be delivering his lecture at 1 p.m. And afterwards, we will have our concluding session. Again, Professor Umar Hassan Kasole, a very renowned professor, intellectual of the Muslim world, and he will be our guest today in the concluding ceremony. So that will be exclusively for our participants from Pakistan, our faculty members, our scholars. The brother from Malaysia will not be attending that program. So thank you very much, Brother Sajjad, for moderating this session, and all the participants. Jazakallah khair. We will leave this group now, this meeting, and we will kindly follow the instructions, the information I'm sharing on WhatsApp group. Jazakallah khair.